And if you're joining us right now, we're talking to the great Tom Birch, owner of Lakes Media. He's the owner and president, and we're having a great conversation about ratings, how they rate radio stations. I kind of have the perspective of the young DJ dealing with Arbitron back in the day in the 70s, getting yelled at for time warping and doing all the little tricks of trade we used to do to mess with our quarter hour. And also Mark Giuliani and Alex Knight, our producer. So if you just joined us, sorry about the delay there. We always have lots of technical things here to deal with. Tom, it's so good to have you here. And Mark, you have different results in a smaller market than Raleigh and Durham, where Tom is. How do your numbers compare? Because you have a couple of radio stations. Are you envious of the numbers that Mark is talking about here?
That Tom's talking about? Well,
Yeah.
we don't really keep track of our numbers because we're not buying the numbers. But
you can see the ratings.
We hear feedback from other
Sure.
stations about how we're doing, and it really depends on the season. So, because of our format, we're not really tied to the community that comes down just for the summer. We're tied more to the people that live there year round, which tend to be people that are probably 8 miles inside from the ocean, inland, back west into the other side of the peninsula. And typically they're very conservative. So we know they're listening. We can tell they're listening. We've had advertisers come back and give us testimonials that they know that as soon as they advertise a product on our station, that people come in the store that day looking for that product. So we know we're getting results, and we know that the power of radio that way. And then when we back it up with all the digital things we're doing, it's pretty strong.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because that sort of ties in with Tom was speaking about earlier before we got our YouTube happening. Tom was talking about what you deliver as a radio station from a sales point of view is you're delivering a process, a digital process that includes not just a radio station, but other related things. How's that, Tom? Talk a little bit about what else do your salespeople do when they go out there and they sell space or time on your radio station. Are you also selling recommendations on what they should do in other digital media?
We have a process in which we have developed over the last 10 years. And we are using our huge radio audience to market our radio stations. So we drive business prospects to our website, lakesmedianetwork.com. And the first thing that they see when they get to our website is a lecture from me that takes about 14 minutes to view on harnessing the power of radio. How do you use radio? How do you make radio work for your business? And our system is working really, really well. We drive people to our website. They don't have to necessarily listen to the whole 14-minute presentation. They can go directly to a tab and they can inquire about how to find out more about how to advertise on the Lakes Media Network. And it's working really, really well. I get probably 4 or 5 inquiries per week that are generated by our over-air campaign that drives people to our contact form that they send to me. And then we work from there to close them. And we have 2 basic ways to sell people on our radio stations. Of course, we have order forms that are for advertisers that need to do something immediately. They have a sale or they are opening up a business. And so they don't necessarily want to get involved with us over a long-term commitment. But we also have plans that give significant discounts to advertisers that are open year-round, lawyers, realtors, any business owner that is always selling a product. And we give them huge discounts for a minimum 3-month commitment. And we set up this 3-month commitment because we know that's how long it takes to build effective reach and frequency that will produce results. And most of our advertisers, most of our clients are now on what we call the 3-3-3 plan, and it's working for us. So things are working well for us. I'm very happy with where we are, and anybody that's on this call that wants to learn more, contact me, and I'll go to lakesmedianetwork.com and click the Harness the Power button, and you can hear my presentation.
Harness the power of Lakes Media.
Yeah.
You need to get the big radio voice in there doing something. And, you and Mark have a lot to talk about, and maybe you guys should communicate after hours. Mark's got a really interesting scenario. He's in a small market, but it's also ADI-wise. It includes Salisbury, Maryland, so that makes it like market number 40. What are there, 44 radio stations?
We're market 134, but there are 42 radio stations in the market.
Yeah, and it's a very disparate audience because Rehoboth, for example, it's the summer capital of the DC market. Yeah. So during the summertime you get a complete turnover of your psychographics and demographics in the marketplace. So that's a hell of a challenge in a small market. But I think he's a lightning rod for how live and local is working for a lot of radio stations instead of it being the big boys out there, the big five, shall we say. These are individuals. Both guys here on our show today are individual owners that have individual problems, and maybe the pendulum is swinging the other way for these radio stations because these big companies might shed themselves of stations as the competition gets more, and their ability to derive income from their properties may cause them to say, okay, well, we're going to let go our 100 plus or below markets. Maybe there's going to be an opportunity to buy these radio stations at a great deal from the big boys. You think that might happen, Tom?
Absolutely. The small market radio stations are doing very well. Let me also mention that not only do we have this local machine that we've built to market over the air, but we, believe it or not, we still do obituaries on some of our stations. We broadcast high school sports, baseball and football in the spring and the fall. Our stations are the essence of the local community, and you cannot reach people using digital the way we reach it over the air. Again, I go back to the latest audience estimates for us, but our little radio stations, we're in Southern Virginia and Northern North Carolina. We are reaching about 200,000 different people each quarter on our stations. And we can generate a lot of results with that, a lot more than digital. Digital is, in my view, digital is very worthwhile, but it's at the bottom of the sales funnel. At the top is our mass media that are driving in massive cume to drive them to the bottom of the sales funnel. The bottom is very important, which is where sales are closed, but you have to get people to come into the top of the funnel. And stations like Mark's and my stations are still playing a huge role in driving people down to the bottom of the sales funnel.
Meanwhile, there are a lot of people out there, we'll call them naysayers, that are speaking poorly about radio's performance today in today's world, where in reality, statistics, even a recent Edison research came back where they were saying radio's still holding 80% of the ears out there if they're driving around in their car somewhere.
80% plus adults 18 plus will tune in to a radio station for 5 or more minutes over a typical week. Radio is still crucial. It's still a viable part of the audio experience.
And
sure.
wow, that 80% has come down from the 90 numbers. The amount of those listeners that make up the 80% is growing. So we're reaching many more people now than we were even when we had a higher percentile.
We are engaged at the local level.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the world we live in, there used to be a pie of listeners out there, and there might be 2 or 3 radio stations competing heavily in one market. Maybe there are 2 top 40s going at it left and right. We're talking the 70s and 80s here.
Yep.
And on TV might have been 4 networks. The world today is such that that pie is a lot bigger and the slices are a lot smaller. So we're competing for very, very small slices of that pie or pieces of that pie. But the other problem is that people are faced with a certain amount of bandwidth in their own heads of availability of what they can watch, see, or do. But the important thing about radio, and I don't want to make this a huge radio love fest, but why not? It's that it's still number one in it's a do with medium. It's the one that you do with. You drive your car with. You mow your lawn with. You bake with. You do your laundry. All those things. It's not so easy to do that with digital media. And when you're in the car, even with your car radio, you still have to go through some more hoops and jumps in order to be able to tune in a stream somewhere. It's so much easier just to punch up your local radio station, which serves a certain geographical area. Meanwhile, the other good thing about radio is that most of these radio stations that, like Tom and Mark are talking about, also have an app so that you can listen to them out of the market. So if you're vacationing, you still want to hear your sports scores, your local high school, you're still going to be able to get them by tuning in some kind of an app. Do you have that, Tom, in your stations?
Oh, yeah, we do. But I have to emphasize that we do not have a personal radio station app. We are on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and on the Fader app, which is a new app I'm involved with. As a full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors of Audia, which is the developer of the FAIDR app that enables our listeners to listen to our stations if they want to for a small subscription fee, commercial free. And the Fader app enables anybody that subscribes to Fader to listen to 14,000 plus radio stations, either with commercials and they can control the content, or commercial free if they subscribe. But so 15 years ago, I made the decision not to invest in our own app because we cannot do it very well. I want to be affiliated with apps that are really perfect, work perfectly well for our listeners. So we are affiliated with iHeart, TuneIn, and Fader. And Mark, I don't know whether you have your own app, and of course you can go online, listen to our stations. Click on listen online and listen on our streams. But we do not have apps.
So we do have our own app, and then we're on TuneIn and a number of the other ways you can listen to radio, and you can just stream us right from our website.
Okay.
So it all works through the app, and that gives you the choice of different stations we have.
It's a brave new world out there, isn't it? So
it's crazy.
Let me take a moment to talk about some of the other interesting things about broadcasting that some people may find funny or weird. This is one of the things that we like to do on The Last Angry DJ. But Tom, you've been around a while, so you have a perspective. What is the propensity for radio stations to call the station name after some kind of an animal, like a frog or a dog or a buzzard or an eagle? Why are they doing that? And would you please stop?
I don't know.
Is there something behind that?
My stations are named for local. For example, in Danville, Virginia, 1045, the Dan, is named for the Dan River that runs through Danville, Virginia. And then I've got Country Legends 105.9, which is named for what we play. Rewind 1019, our classic hit station in South Hill, Virginia, is for what we're playing on the radio. US 98.3 is patriotic for country listeners that love America. And no, I don't get that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying because the name says what you do, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
That appeals to my marketing brain.
Yeah,
that
I'm a marketing guy.
But I don't get the frog. I mean, what's the frog?
I don't understand that. I don't understand why they do that, but there must be a reason. They're smarter than I am.
Well, that's what they like. They like to think. So what are you going to do? So you decided, I guess, a long time ago, not to become part of the big conglomerate iHeart or one of those other big five.
No, we're in it. No, our stations are all on iHeart.
Oh, you're on them, but
We
you're not
are.
owned
Yes,
by
we
them?
are. Oh, yeah. And I had to go. I am one of the few small independent broadcasters that isn't on iHeart Radio. I can't ignore iHeart. They're too big to ignore. So in order to do this, I have to carry some commercial content to support iHeart.
Oh, so you're in their system. Got it.
I am in their system. So when you go on iHeart Radio, you're going to get Lakes Media stations.
Okay, got it. Understood. And I think in my experience, TuneIn is tough to get on these days because they're like complaining that there's just not enough room.
We're on there too. I have all sorts of problems with TuneIn. I'm arguing with them all the time about they're all the commercials they're playing on my streams, but I'm still on with them because they have a huge audience, and I cannot afford not to be on with them.
Understood that. And the fact that radio has a way to extend their geographical thumbprint beyond what they typically would as a Class A or a Class B station over a certain geographical area, the internet and digital tends to expand that way beyond that. So how do you compete out there when everybody's playing the same music, essentially?
We're local. I don't give a shit. Pardon my language. I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
But we are programmed for our local audiences. And so if somebody elsewhere listening to our stream enjoys what we're playing in Danville, Virginia, Oxford, Henderson, North Carolina, South Hill, Virginia, have at it. What's interesting is that two of our stations, Country Legends 105.9 in Danville, and our urban AC station, 967 WSHV in South Hill, Virginia, have massive national audiences because what we're programming on these stations is not available locally in a lot of these places. So we have huge national audiences to these stations. And the problem I'm having is I can't figure out how to monetize them. I'm trying to figure it out, but we have big audiences out there waiting to be monetized.
Is the trend working correctly for you? Is it trending that way?
Yeah, everything. Our stream audiences are growing. We are doing really, really well.
Okay, good. Mark, do we have some questions coming in from Discord or from YouTube that we can get on the show?
So we do have some questions here. We have a question from one of our viewers. How did Ray Quinn and Tom buy a station in Jackson, Mississippi, whose combined ratings took them over the FCC limit?
That is a very good question. And we had to fight some battles to get that done. This goes back to 1994. Ray and I, through our company Opus Media, owned WTYX FM in Jackson, which was an oldie station, which was combined with an AM urban AC or gospel station, a gospel station. And when we went to buy these stations from Art Holt, he owned the top rated urban station, 99. I forget. Please bear with me. I'm 73 years old. but he owned the top rated urban station in Jackson, Mississippi, and his AM station was also one of the top rated gospel stations. So when we went to buy these stations, we were back in the day, the FCC had a limit on what your share could be in terms of the number of the share point that you could control in a market. And we exceeded that. And the way we got around it was I can't believe this. This must have come from somebody from Jackson. We moved the frequency of the urban station from 99.3 to 94.7 or whatever it was, where WTOX is, and we traded call letters so that then we could slip in under the FCC requirements, and we got it done.
Wow.
The FCC approved of that because of that sleight of hand that we did.
That is way above my pay grade, but that was an interesting time in the 90s.
It was crazy. It was really crazy. Yeah.
Buying stations left and right. It was like the stations were valued way beyond their income levels, but it was an interesting time in broadcasting.
And when we combined these properties, my company, Opus Media Group, ended up with a 70% share of local audience in Jackson, Mississippi. And we did it legally because of the way we pulled it off.
Did you flip it right away, or did you hold on to it a while?
Oh, no. There's a whole nother story after that. Other story.
Well, it sounds like one that
we were sued. I could write a book about this whole episode.
Speaking of legal, are you in a position to talk about some legal hassles you had when you own a radio station in a market? You're protected by other radio stations encroaching on your frequency.
No, you're not protected at all. No.
Tell us what happened.
This is now let me get on the grandstand. This is horrible. We're not protected. My Class C3 FM station, which is licensed to Clarksville, Virginia, but it covers 16 counties in North Carolina and Southern Virginia. In 2016, an operator in Durham, North Carolina, put a translator on our frequency. And this is in August of 2016. And we reported this interference to the FCC. And long story short, it took me until October of 2017 to finally take this translator interference down.
Now, can I jump in a second, explain it? A translator, for people that don't understand, is a low-power FM transmitter of about 250 watts that they're short-spaced for the purposes of filling in where their local major station is not covering properly. And they're authorized
by the FCC to sign on if they don't interfere inside of our 45 dBu contour.
Correct. But
this station in 2016, which was owned by a guy named Robbie Curry, went on the air and immediately covered us up in all of our North Carolina counties. And when we reported the interference to the FCC, he was required to go in and report back to the FCC what the interference levels were with each interference point that we reported to the FCC. And he sent out his quote-unquote engineer to each location. And when he was at each location, they shut down their transmitter.
Oh.
So there was no interference reported. So this went on for over a year until we finally nailed him and got him off the air. Now, in the meantime, a very reputable broadcaster in North Carolina, Don Curtis, who happens to be a friend of mine. Don owns most of the major radio stations in the Raleigh-Durham area. Don phoned me up and said, Tom, I want to put a translator on the frequency that your station, WLUS 98.3. I want to put a translator on, but we're not going to interfere with you. And I said to Don, no, you cannot do that. That's not going to work. Don't do that. This is in 2021. And I heard nothing from him for the next 3 years. Then last year, in August of 2024, Don Curtis put a translator on my 98.3 position, which of course immediately interfered with us. And of course, I told Don, if you do this, I'm going to file against this and stop this. But the problem is the FCC is not configured to rapidly respond to situations like this. So we put it on the air, and between August of 2023 until March of this year, when I finally got it off the air, he wiped us out in I think 6 counties in North Carolina, completely wiped out our signal. So we have a major problem. What I believe has to happen here is that the FCC has to change its regulations, and that if somebody decides with a major, class C3, C2, C1 radio station wants to put a anybody that wants to put a translator on the air that interferes with a class C level station, if they're found to interfere, they should be required to pay all of the legal fees and all of the fees and engineering fees that we incur to get them off the air. In my case, this cost me over $20,000 against Curtis, over $20,000. And I had another $20,000+ situation in 2016. So I have a big problem with this. We need to do something about this. The FCC regulations need to be changed to make the interferer required to reimburse the station that was interfered with.
Do you have problems with pirate radio stations in and around Raleigh?
No, I've not had that problem.
And it's ironic because legally broadcasting radio stations that cause interference, which is not a good thing, are legal, and pirate stations are definitely illegal, and yet you don't have any of those broadcasting.
Yeah, well, I've been reading about what's going on in Miami. It's unbelievable.
It's a tough market.
Yeah, but the other thing, I have not had a problem with pirates, but I have a problem with legal, quote unquote, legal operators.
Yeah, they're carpetbaggers. Yeah, they're carpetbaggers. They're nothing less than the Wild West.
Think about it. This is analogous to if somebody moves onto your property in my backyard back here and builds a tent and decides that they want to move in and live on my property. And in order for me to get rid of them, I have to hire engineers to determine that they're on our property. And I have to hire the police to get rid of them. This is just insanity. This stuff has to go. It has to stop. It's wrong.
So this particular case, did you set any precedents so that future legal actions?
No. There's no. I thought I set the precedent in 2016 when I got rid of Robbie Cherukuri, and then Don Curtis comes along in 3 years later and just replicates exactly what Robbie Cherukuri did when I got rid of him. No, I have not set any precedent. We need to change the regulations.
Right. And I have filed some LPFM, which is low-powered FM, which is 100 watts above average terrain. And I know for a fact that the legalese that the FCC requires that you fill out is that if you interfere with a station from their contour, you must cease broadcasting. I mean, there's no question about it on the LPFM license.
But good luck getting the FCC to act on it. The problem is, I filed, at the last week of August, and the first really realistic response I got from them was in mid-November, saying it would be another 90 days before they could make another response. I filed at the end of August this last time, and I could not get the Curtis interference off the air until the middle of March of this year.
So you're basically being forced to pay large sums of money to protect something that's legally yours, and it's unfair in terms of the way that goes. Well, Mark, don't you live in fear of that happening in a very busy market?
I don't know the details of this, but there was a station in our marketplace that had a translator, and the rumor is that they were 100 times. They cranked up their equipment. They were supposed to be 100 watts. They were going at over 1,000 watts. So over 10 times the amount.
3,000 watts, believe it or not.
Yeah. And it took about a year for the FCC to knock on the door.
Yeah. The
because they
FCC
had,
is
as
not
you said, they had
capable
to
of
go through
responding.
all of this process. They had to do this, and then they had to wait
Yeah.
a certain period of time. Then they had to do that. So they're just not set up to be a police force, if you will. They're set up
No.
to mandate things.
And yet, most of the FCC, if you consider the HR position, they're mostly lawyers. They're supposed to be doing this stuff, watching the airways, protecting us from pirates and stations that are illegally broadcasting or cranking their power up beyond their licensed amount. If they don't enforce it, then they're just going to encourage people to do it. So this is a good anecdote to warn these people. Although I think the fines need to be. It's like the pirate radio situation. The fines have been negligible. But, Tom mentioned Miami. A lot of stations are broadcasting pirate stations. They're just people that just decide, I'm going to go on the air and make my own radio station. I'm going to do disco and Latino music or whatever the case may be. And then they just move their transmitter around. Or they just and some of them are very popular. They've got they're actually showing up in the books as they should be delisted. They shouldn't be allowed to be rated or have any kind of footprint in any particular market. I think it's also very popular in New York City, in some of the surrounding areas out in the Midwest, where anyhow, they're out there, and it's not a good thing, and it's bad news. What about stations that are doing they're ghosting the Channel 6 TV frequency? Has that been stopped yet? As the TV stations are moving their frequencies around to do digital, some of the stations are broadcasting radio on it's like 88.2 or 81, something like that. Is that a problem in any markets you're aware of?
I have not encountered it here.
I thought the low 80s were all part of public radio, NPR.
Up to a point. But that's the old days. They repacked all those stations too. And this brings up a good point, and it's for Mark and for Tom. Are you concerned that with the telecom industry and Congress being what it is anxiously trying to figure out ways to degrade the radio bandwidth that's currently set for AM and FM and sort of sell it off to the major telecoms that probably want it for their own purposes? Isn't that you're kind of breathing down your neck? Or do you feel that you have to, what do you use to fight against that possibility?
It's beyond my pay grade.
Ah,
You know,
I don't know
think-
what to do.
Yeah,
Right now, I'm just fighting for local radio revenue.
Yep.
So I can't even begin to think about that happening.
I'm not an expert in the area, but it seems to me that the least expensive way for the federal government to get emergency messages out is through the AM band, because they can cover the whole country with 70 stations. So
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a while before the digital is reliable enough to
Yeah.
replace at the AM frequency. And I know people say, oh, nobody listens to it, but a lot of people do listen to it. It's talk radio. The radio stations are against it. I mean, the automotive companies are against it because it makes the cars more expensive to be able to have AM in an electric car, just because they have to insulate that all the noise better, so that you can hear the AM station and not the engines. But
both you guys own FM stations. What's your concern about an AM station being eliminated from a car? Is it sort of scary that they might start there and move on to something else, or you're looking out for your brothers in the AM band?
Well, I can speak for myself, and this is very selfish, but the reality is nobody's listening to our AM stations on AM right now. All of we have 3 AM stations, and they're all on translators, and all of our audience is on the translators.
So these are legal translators that are not interfering with anybody.
No,
so
absolutely.
so we get it straight.
Yeah.
You don't hate translators. You just hate ones that are breaking the rules.
Exactly.
Yeah, understood. Makes sense. And just again, clarifying for people that don't know, the FCC wondering about the plight of AM radio coverage, allow an AM radio station in a market to have a translator so that they can expand their coverage. And some of these little radio, I mean, there might be a 5,000 or a 1,000 watt AM station has a 250-watt FM translator, relies more on the listeners on the translator than they do on their AM. And you got to begin to wonder at one point, why shouldn't they just turn their license in on the AM side? So I kind of see that happening in terms of, a long term.
Yeah,
and as far as,
the reality is the audience has transitioned completely to FM. They're not listening to AM. And while I applaud the NAB's work to try to keep AM stations on the air, the audience to AM is negligible. Everybody's listening to radio on FM.
Right, so it should be a no-brainer that they're going to kill AM in a car.
They could, and I'm not sure it's going to really have a massive impact on audience.
So I have a question about that then. If the translators are translating what's originally coming off an AM signal, and the EAS is sending that signal to AM stations because it needs fewer than the FM stations, aren't you going to lose those EAS transmissions because they originated on an AM frequency if you get rid of those AM stations?
Good question.
Yeah, well, they're talking about changing the emergency broadcasting system to software.
Yeah.
So it goes out in the software. I mean, just the other day, there was a armed robbery in northern Newcastle County, and it alerted all my. I carry my iPhone wherever I go. Why don't you just let the iPhone do that job?
Because that whole network gets overwhelmed so easily. And I remember on September 11th being in DC. On September 11th, you could make a call for about a minute after things started to happen, and then our phones all locked up and said for government use only.
Haven't they fixed that? Did they?
No, I think the government's going to pull all the, in time of emergency, they're going to say, we need that frequencies. We need the space. Anyway, we have some questions if we want to get to those.
Sure, let's get to them.
Okay, from Lois Richter. Has the FCC been downsized yet?
That's for you, Tom.
I think they have, but I don't know the exact statistics, but I know that DOJ is downsizing everything, and I think the FCC is in the process of being downsized.
I don't know for a fact, but living and working around DC, at all the agencies, all the employees at all the agencies are walking on pins and needles because they don't know what's going to happen next week.
Sure, understood.
And more questions? Next week, the specific next week, but every week they're continually worried about what's going to get downsized.
I'm still waiting for my $5,000 check that I'm supposed to get over all this.
All right, we have another question. How did Tom and Ray Quinn make Love 94 the #1 station in Savannah in the first book?
Oh, I love that question. I can tell you, this is back in the day when I still did call-out research and focus group research. And when we took over Love 94, the first thing we did was we did a 100-person panel of listeners to learn what songs they wanted to hear. And we used that to generate our playlist. And Love 94, I can't believe you're bringing this up. This is one of the most successful programming launches in my career. But we launched Love 94, if my memory is correct, in September of 1992. And in the first Arbitron, the fall of 1992, that came out in early 1993, Love 94 went from 0 to #1, 25 to 54. And it's because we had no disc jockeys, except for we had our morning show was a syndicated talent out of Dallas, whose name escapes me, who is huge. He did the morning show, and then from 10 a.m. to 6 a.m. the next morning, it was nonstop music. And our playlist was about 200 songs, and they were anthems, all urban, adult, contemporary anthems. Anita Baker, uh, just fantastic music, and it worked.
Yep. And I'm gonna throw this one at Alex because I'm gonna see his eyebrows go right up to his forehead. Back in the day, and even maybe today, the way you made a radio station number one, let's say from worst to first, is that you would play 20, maybe 30, like you said, anthem songs, 30 hits. That means that some songs played more than once an hour.
Yep.
And you did that. There was a reason behind it. And you might have had an oldie list of about 200 or 100 records for that sake. So you've got this radio station. It's only playing about 250 songs, all told. And they're all very, very high testing songs, instantly familiar, instantly huge hits. And it's amazing how fast that worked. I mean, Bob Pittman was famous for doing that to most of his stations.
Bob's a friend of mine.
There you go. There you go.
Bob and I, in 1977, when I was the program director of WQAM in Miami,
sure.
and Bob was the program director of WNBC in New York City. WNBC. We were both doing call-out research, and Bob was using the software that I had developed when I was in Oklahoma City on WNBC in New York City to calculate the results of their call-out research. And we would compare notes in a conference call once a week, Monday mornings. We had another program director in San Diego that was part of this conference call, and we'd compare notes. But Bob made WNBC number one using call-out music research, using my software to tabulate.
So there you see, again, Alex, that would be the antithesis of the way you like to listen to music, because it's saying that if somebody's listening to the radio for 20 minutes, maybe in morning drive and then again an afternoon drive, and they're punching around looking for a station to listen to, chances are if they hit this station that's playing this very, very tight playlist of the best music, they're likely to hear a song that they like and recognize a lot faster than one that's trying to play B-sides or to expand the market, or they're getting paid.
Our current playlist, I can't speak for Bob Pittman on WNBC, but WQAM's currents were 13 songs, and they turned over every 90 minutes. And it was based on our understanding that the average listening session was about 25 minutes. So what we wanted to do was, during the 25-minute listening session of most of our listeners, we wanted to delight them, make sure that every song they heard was their favorite.
Except, how long does that work? And when it starts to wear on people, does
it wears
factor?
Out. The problem is there are other people that listen longer than a couple sessions per day. But being a pragmatist, I didn't care. All I wanted to get an average listener was 20 to 25 minutes in morning drive and maybe midday or afternoon drive. But I wanted to drive our cume to the moon. And it worked. That's how we got radio stations to be number one.
And I'm not disagreeing that it worked, but I'm also interested in Alex's input on that kind of strategy being done, not for the benefit of the listeners, for the benefit of the numbers, the ratings that you got back in return.
Right.
Alex?
It's, I don't listen to much music anymore on the radio, but when I did back in the 90s, I definitely had that experience where, hunting around the dial, hearing repeat songs, and it was annoying. I'm not going to lie. I don't like that.
My stations. You would hate listening to my stations.
But you know what? No, it's not a reflection of you. It's the industry. I know it's a thing.
No offense. I'm just programming for masses. Lots of people. My biggest complaint from our listeners is we play the same songs over and over and over. Why don't you change your songs?
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about, I don't know if he's still doing it, but Randy Bachman, for the longest time on CBC, had this radio program, and his knowledge of music history is incredible. And he would do this show where he would curate this list of music, and sometimes it would be stuff that was lesser known, and he would talk about this is what happened at that time in history when they were recording the album. This is what happened in the studio, like really interesting facts, and I love that kind of stuff. But then you listen to the average station, it's just like it's the same song over and over, and I would skip and I would hunt around the dial because I would get bored hearing the same stuff over and over again.
By the way, just for the record, I have all of my stations are very tightly formatted, and I love to tune into them every now and then to listen to what our people are doing. But I listen to classical music all day long.
Yeah, we can hear it in the background. And I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that was what worked. And it was being done, and it was amazing that more people didn't do it. And here's the weirdness about that is I've worked at stations where they were like, more variety, better music. And they would say, we're the alternative to the station across the street that's playing 13 hot songs every hour. But here's the thing. Most people were passive listeners, which meant that they were punching up and down the dial, listening to different stations. So they were hearing the same songs over and over again anyhow, whether we played them or everybody else did. So it was a muddled mess. It was a muddled mess. The
biggest complaints I got for how I programmed my radio stations was from our sales staff. They hated it. They would listen to the stations because they wanted to hear their spots to be sure but they hated the fact that we played the same damn songs over and over and over. But it wasn't for them. This is a business strategy.
Sure. Alex, you had something else you wanted to say about this?
Yeah, so on this topic too, and this is a very interesting conversation because it's we've had discussions in other industries talking about the streaming business and also the economics of streaming TV and movies. And one of the things that I find interesting is, these streaming platforms, unlike broadcast terrestrial radio, they have access to a wealth of information about their users, about their habits. They have access to so much more data that, anyone who runs a radio station would only dream of having. And one of the things that I find interesting is sort of analogous to what you're talking about here, Tom, is, obviously this programming strategy works for bumping up the queue, but also for streaming platforms, for example, like Netflix. When they see the trend of, let's just say, for example, true crime shows, super popular, right? So they put out a show and it becomes incredibly popular. And so they start looking at viewer habits and they start curating content to those habits. And so all of a sudden they start investing in more true crime shows. They say, well, they're watching true crime shows. Let's give them more true crime shows, right? And so what concerns me with that strategy and with this type of strategy is it creates this kind of homogenous content that just at some point I feel like it stops working well and people will kind of turn away from it because they all of a sudden lose interest. They say there's too much true crime or they're playing the same song over and over again. So at what point do you actually listen to listeners or your audience, or do you at all, or is that something like, what do you do there?
Well, when the audience ratings decrease, then we start listening. It's all about audience measurement.
That's fair. That's fair.
And so if it's not working, we're going to change.
Well, there were also a lot of things, Alex, back in the day, and I'll again dig back to my WFIL days when I was music director. We did call out research. I did respect what Tom was doing and others like him. But there were, you'd hear these things that people would say to you, like they'd yell it real loud on the request line and hang up. Like one of the things they'd say, such and such FM radio station, they play more music. And then they'd hang up on me. And if I had a chance to have a conversation with those people, I would say, you know why FM stations play more music and less commercials? Is they're less viable as an advertising medium. It's like FM is trying to build an audience. This is back in the day when AM was king. The reason they were playing less commercials is that they couldn't play more commercials. If they could, they would. And guess what? Today they do. They're
Yeah.
just as guilty of playing. They weren't out there for challenging the cause of listeners that wanted that variety and less commercials, but they made it sound like a battle, and a lot of them managed to do really well. There's a lot of false information that people would gather as to the viability of ratings and why stations would do this and that. But again, getting back to the original point, we can sort of wrap this up about this particular subject, is that playing a short playlist and coming into a new market with a station that's low on the ratings, it works. It just simply works.
Yeah.
So that's why it was being done. And when you get down to it, the owners of these radio stations, they have a responsibility to get the best ratings that they could. And that's what they did, and it's like, I'll never, and this is my favorite story to tell, and I'll make it a quick, sad story. When I was at WFIL at a young age of 19 and 20, I was music director.
Great radio station, Mitch.
Thank you.
I
Appreciate
love
that.
WFIL.
It was one of the top 4 radio stations in the country at the time, when you think about the big stations around the country. And they had just bought an FM frequency from, it was WPBS, I believe. And they had done this big survey and research, Magid survey, and they had determined that, we're gonna create a format on this FM station, in the same market that goes after WMGK or WIP. And they were gathering up this, it was going to be easy listening. And just another boring, easy listening FM station associated with FIL.
Yeah.
And here, Tom, you'll like this story. I remember walking into Jim DeCaro and Jay Cook and saying, "Look, guys, I'm
Love
looking
these
at
guys."
the ratings," and I had the ratings, and I loved them too. And I said, "We're losing share every freaking ratings period." And they're saying, "Okay, well, where are we losing it to?" I said, "We're losing it to FM. We're losing it to Wi-Fi and WYSP." And they were saying, "Well, why is that?" I said, "Because that's where the audience is going. You just bought an FM station, and now you've got this big research project to do some ridiculous format. Why don't we take WFIL, which is a legacy radio station,
Put it on FM.
and put it on the FM where everybody's going?" And
Yeah.
they just thought I was so anti, "You're just a young whippersnapper. What the hell do you know?" And I kept saying, "Please, please, please do this," because you got this huge juggernaut that's a marketing, as you said, WFIL was a famous radio station back in those days.
Famous 56.
It would still be here today if
Yep.
they had done that. So instead of doing that, they just let FIL die, along with a lot of other AM radio stations.
Very sad.
Back when Tom and I were DJs on the radio, we were the king in our marketplace. When you were down in Miami doing your thing, or New Orleans, Tom, I remember listening to air checks of you, Tom. You're a great DJ back in your day. You're quick, you're upbeat. If you didn't feel well, bullshit. You just sounded like you were having the best time on the air. And that was the trick to being a
Those
great
were the
DJ
days.
back then.
It was fun.
Telling people everything's okay. We're on the air, and it's a beautiful day, and we're playing the music. Have fun. That was what radio was all about. So, yeah, Alex, I'm sensitive to what you're saying, but we weren't out there trying to change the methodology of the way people listen. We were just out there to deliver the goods, because in the radio business, you're only as good as the last book you had. And at FIL, it proved out to be true. One, as I pissed off Jay Cook and Jim DeCaro at WFIL by being the voice of reason. And yes, ultimately, it proved out that I was right. That didn't make anything work well. The next thing I know, my contract is not getting renewed, and I'm out of there. And then I just said, "Well, this is bullshit. I hate this about radio."
Oh my God.
You can't win that battle. You can't win that battle. You can't be. I wasn't like Randy Bachman of BTO, where I could tell some great stories. And he was in the middle of a bit of controversy too at that time. Remember, Randy was with the Guess Who, and then he left Guess Who, and then started his own band, and he wasn't popular right away. But anyhow, the point of the matter is that radio was a very transient business back in the day, and it was crazy. I got a question for Tom. Tom, this is actually coming from Ray Quinn. See if you remember how the Grease Man signed off on his last show on WAXC in Halloween time.
Oh,
the Grease Man, a great character.
Ray, I was stoned. I don't remember.
Oh, that's great. You know, I've asked the Grease, who lives, by the way, not too far from here. He's in the Chesapeake Bay area.
Yeah,
I've
I
asked him
love
to be
Grease.
on this
By
program.
the way, Grease
And-
and I lived together.
Oh,
When
no.
he was, I was the weekend disc jockey on WENE, a Merv Griffin station in Endicott, New York. And Grease was doing 7 to midnight. And I was going to Cornell, and Doug Track, Grease Man, was going to Ithaca College. And Doug had an apartment in Endicott. And I used to hang out with him. We did excessive amounts of marijuana.
Was he working out like a crazy man? He was always like always pumped up.
No. He was skinny. This
Wow.
is before he became the workout guy. No, he was skinny. He was, but we had a lot of fun with it.
I bumped into him not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, Schaefer's Canal House down on Chesapeake, and he had the good ship Grease with him, and he's enjoying his retirement. But I've asked for him to be on the.
Is he still a bodybuilder?
He's sort of melted into it. That's the best way to say it. He's an older guy.
I haven't seen him in 10 years. So
there you go. You should reach out to him, because I keep getting his handler, and his handler always keeps brushing me off, saying Grease doesn't do radio anymore. And I'm saying, here you can come on and you can talk about all the great things. But the question would be, would he come on as Grease, or would he come on as Doug Tract? I think he'd have to be in his Grease character.
I would love to see you get him on this show. That would be fantastic.
Good. I'm going to use your name as a reference.
And Quinn.
Say that get Ray Quinn back on. Get you, Grease, and Ray on, and that'll be the thing. And you guys can talk about upstate New York radio back in the day.
That'd be great.
Because that would be what, Waxy?
Waxy, well, for me, it's WENE and WAXC, and Quinn is WAXC. And he also was on a station in Canandaigua, New York, before he went to WAXC.
Yeah,
I was also on WBBF in Rochester.
Oh, there you go. So that's where you guys are from?
Yep.
There you go. So New York boys. I remember the first time I met Ray, he was coming to work nights at WAMS here in Wilmington, and he drove up into the parking lot, and it was I was on the air doing the night shift, and Ray comes out of his car. He stares at me through the window that looked out over the parking lot, and he dropped trowel right there and mooned me. It's hard to believe that he was your business partner, and he was market manager in many markets over the years. So I should have taken a picture.
That's
I could have
classic
done something.
Quinn. Classic Quinn.
Yeah, it was a classic Quinn move. What are you going to do?
So
here you go, Tom. A choice beyond owning and running a radio station or a very successful diner. Which would you take?
You know what? I'm still with radio. Our stations are doing really well. So, the diner would be too hard for me. So I'm going to stick with radio. Plus, I love radio. I love radio. I love what I'm doing.
And see, that leads into my point that I want to make here is that I froze up there for some reason. I'm not sure what happened. Are we still on the air?
You're frozen, but I can hear you.
I'm frozen, but I can keep talking. Okay, I'll keep talking. People in radio have it in their blood. I haven't been on the air for a couple of decades, but I love it. It's in my blood, and that's a cool thing about it. So it's true with Mark. I know that Mark does it because he loves the business. He's passionate about it. And Tom, you're still doing it really well and having fun.
I love it. I love radio. I love what I'm doing.
If I owned a diner, I'd weigh 400 pounds and have no profits.
What are you going to do? So you guys are going to have to take over while I do a reboot here because I don't know why I'm frozen up. But go ahead,
okay,
Alex.
Yeah, no problem. I actually I'm going to go to you, Tom, because I have a few questions. Let's talk about new media. We've talked about old media. Let's talk about new media. I want to talk about podcasting, and not just podcasts, but let's just say new media, which would be a broad term to encompass, say, live streaming platforms like YouTube. And I really feel like both podcasting and video platforms like YouTube have really democratized the capability for that for the average person to really have a voice, to have a show, because the barrier to entry was really, really high. To get on a radio station, you got to make a demo tape. Someone's got to take you under their wing, give you an opportunity, give you a chance. And, for better or worse, obviously, there's lots of slop out there, but there's also lots of great content. And the fact that for very little money now, people even like us can do this incredibly polished looking show. So what are your thoughts on podcasts? Where does that fit in with traditional terrestrial radio? And I'll lump YouTube into this because some radio stations are successfully taking video components very, very seriously. People like Mark have embraced new technology to create new online communities to engage with their listeners. You've got amazing stations like KEXP in Seattle that to me stand out. They built a bespoke video production studio where they're inviting bands and doing this incredible video production on YouTube. I don't know anybody else that's doing anything even remotely close to them, maybe with the exception of NPR. You have NPR Tiny Desk, which is a fantastic show. So where does all this fit in with radio?
Well, from my view, podcasting is huge. It's skyrocketing, and it's a completely different medium than radio. Radio is linear. We are producing curated product for people, and if somebody wants to listen to something that it's very easy for them to be involved with, that they like, radio is not going to be replaced by podcasting. But on the other side of the coin, if you are interested in somebody who, the podcasts are so interesting, so different. That's a vertical medium. It is completely uncurated. So it's hard to compare them. So I think that there's a place for radio and there's a place for podcasting. And I think podcasting is growing faster than radio.
And do you think that as far as the podcast strategy is concerned for radio stations, because I see some radio stations just kind of don't really do much beyond taking the ads out, taking the music out, repackaging, say, a talk show and making it a podcast. But I also see other radio stations that are doing original content and doing this amazing supplemental content that is designed specifically for, like you said, because podcast is a different medium. It should be you shouldn't expect it to be radio because it isn't. So we see people kind of tackling it in a different way. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you see value in creating supplemental content that is unique for the audience that exists there on that platform?
My problem is that I'm a very small market broadcaster. I can barely make ends meet right now. So I don't have the financial capacity to empower somebody to do podcasts. And I don't really know how to monetize it in our little markets. So, for a small market broadcaster like me, it's not going to happen. Podcasting is not going to be part of what we do. Maybe for a larger group, it could happen. But I frankly, I don't see how it is as valuable as over-the-air advertising. So I don't see radio groups doing podcasting. I think it's a completely different entity from radio.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mark, weigh in.
So, what I think is different about most of the podcasts that are out there and radio is that, at least on the talk format of radio, it's interactive. You've got callers calling in. It's live. There's live questions that are there. And then with the stuff we're experimenting with, we have groups of people that are actively in a website asking questions, talking with the host through chat. The host is picking up that chat as it's building up and referring it back to any panelists that they have in that they're talking back and forth with. So it becomes a group and a community that is able to have a conversation about a subject matter. That podcast is like original radio. It's one to many.
Yeah.
And you don't know when. There's no time sync there because it's on demand.
Yeah, and also I think, you know, it's interesting you mentioned online communities too, and the live chat component. Mark, you've obviously talked about in the past, and some people that are listeners of this show know the tools that you're using. Can you speak to like tools like the Q&A system that you're using exactly? Like how has that changed things, and how is that different from just taking questions another way, the old-fashioned way, by having people call into a phone number?
So I think one of the benefits of using these additional tools is that when you have a radio station that's also bringing video out and bringing people in, bringing people that we're going to call panelists in that are being interviewed, and you have multiple at a time, and a host can see them, and that host has the ability to see the nonverbal communication, so they can see as they're reading a question and they're looking at a screen, they can see who wants to answer it just by that nonverbal communication, so they can go directly to them. So it makes a very tight show. But also you have this other side of this, which is the community is having a chat back and forth. They're conversing about those questions. The host can read up on that as someone's answering a question and add to that question, get a different perspective from it, and bring in what the audience is saying in real time, which is like talk radio, but now it's on steroids because the communication's constantly going back and forth between many people and not just that one phone call at a time.
And Mitch, you're back now. Do you want to chime in?
Well, we don't hear you.
Oh, you're muted. You're Zoom muted. Just had Mitch.
We need to
reboot.
have
There.
a jingle that says "You are
He's back.
muted." And get on my case. I was going to say, could we get another question in from
Sure.
the peanut gallery out there?
So before we get to the question, I did a little research on Lois's question before about the FCC and whether or not it's going through the downsizing. And just to bring some history in the 1990s, the FCC had over 2,000 employees. By 2024, they were down to under 1,500 employees. And in 2015, so about halfway between that period of time, they cut their they restructured their enforcement bureau from 24 field offices to 13 field offices. So that speaks to what Tom was talking about before. They may have a lot of the rules and regulations in place, but they don't have the resources right now, at least, to be out in the field and enforcing all of this. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting part of it. Lois has another question, which is define your terms, please. Since our radio programs have had RSS feeds for 20 years now, what are they? What are we considering podcast?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. Well, for what is considered a podcast is technically something that does exist in an RSS feed. Like Lois has already talked about that here. Let me just make sure I understand her question. RSS feed. Yeah. So an RSS feed is basically a text file, to put it in layman terms, a plain text file that has a bunch of code in there. And typically it has either a link to an audio file or a link to a video. Podcasts are more traditionally known for audio only, but the podcast format supports video, although most people don't take advantage of it. So basically that's all it is. So for it to be considered a podcast, it's got to be in this RSS format, and then it gets submitted to a directory, which everyone knows is Apple's podcast directory. And lots of other services pull data from Apple, because that's really the only podcast platform or directory that really, really matters. Now, other people have their own silos that are proprietary. Spotify has a closed platform, so you have to submit, like The Last Angry DJ is available on Spotify, but I had to submit it outside of Apple. So it exists on their platform, and they have their own proprietary analytics data available there. And then you have there's lots of other platforms. Now, YouTube has actually gotten involved with podcasts now. They're kind of doing it a weird way, so you can submit your own RSS feed to YouTube, and it will show up as an actual playlist, and you can play podcasts that way, but it's a bit weird.
It may be possible that video podcasting is sort of looming on the horizon the way FM loomed on the horizon of AM radio. It's possible. I think more and more people are considering the video aspects of a podcast as more relevant. And the other important thing about it, and Tom, this should appeal to your technical and ratings mentality, is that YouTube has these whole metadata fenced in ways that regular podcasts don't. In other words, regular podcast, they can tell where you're coming from and what your IP address is and whether you're on or off, but that's about it. With YouTube, they have a lot more depth that they can get out of that. Alex, why don't you tell them a little bit of the type of metadata that's available from a YouTube podcast that, like ours, we're doing right now?
Yeah, so you're right, Mitch. There is certainly a lot more data. So with the frustrating thing with podcasts, and I understand why advertisers have slowed down on ad spends, is because basically they feel that the ROI isn't necessarily there as much because they don't have access to the data that they want, and they want to know more about who the listeners are. And the problem inherently with podcasts, the way they were designed, 20 years ago, is that you really just have an IP address. So I can tell roughly where somebody's located in the world, how many times they've downloaded the show. That is all I have. I don't have anything about the demographics, psychographics. I don't have any of that data. And these companies, of course, I understand if they're going to spend money on ads, they want to know more about those people, but it's kind of too late because and Apple has no interest in trying to change the podcast standard that everybody adopted 20 years ago, because Apple has this reputation of being more privacy centric. They're very cautious about just collecting and siphoning all this user data. Now, YouTube, on the other hand, if I were to show you our YouTube dashboard, I have a lot more information. I mean, in addition to just being able to see how many times somebody's looked at the show, we also can see information like the gender of the person. You have access to their location data, but it goes way beyond just pure counting of how many people have actually looked at a show, because it's Google. I mean, Google's primary business is selling ads, unlike other companies. So, it's very rich in data, which, like I said many times before, radio stations would love to have access to that data. I don't think podcasts are going to change anytime soon. Fundamentally, I think, it was locked in 20 something years ago. I think for it to change now would require a change by Apple, and Apple, again, has just no interest in changing things because they don't want to give away that data.
And people can do a podcast on the spur of the moment. They may decide that they want to do a podcast on their what they had for lunch, and then do a regular lunch show, or how they like to tie bows on presents, or whatever. That's the way it works. It's the cost of ownership. I call it the country club admission. Doesn't require that you search the FCC, you buy a radio station, you put a tower up, you build studios, transmitter. You can just turn your computer on and have your own little broadcast, and that's making things challenging for a lot of reasons. One is that it's really hard, for example, to shout and be heard. Like we like to yell about, please hit the subscribe button, because that's how we get voted. And right now we're up to 195 subscribers, which may not sound like a lot, but we live and die based on the number of people that watch our live broadcast every week. And then in addition to that number that I just gave you, we also have the audio-only podcast in the traditional sense. So as long as that's the world we live in right now, we're going to follow that for what it's worth. It's sort of like a poor man's radio station in a sense, but like the introduction of desktop publishing and desktop video and things like that, there are good podcasts out there and vodcasts, and there are really bad ones. And some of those, unfortunately, are coming from radio stations that decide, well, we're going to get into it by putting a camera in the studio when we do our morning show. And some of those work well, and some of those look horrible. So until everybody cleans up their act and does it well, it's not going to be really considered serious, because people's expectations are now based on all of these wonderful pieces of streaming media that you get on all these streaming media sources that are available to you from, Paramount and Prime, and from Netflix and Max, which is soon going back to HBO Max. It's like it's a whole different world. And you know what? It's a world that's passed me by at my ripe age of 70, soon to be 71. So anyhow, that's we covered a lot of stuff here, and I appreciate Tom Birch for coming in and giving us background. We really, really feel strongly about locally owned and locally operated radio stations. I think, Tom, that you represent that very well, and I think Mark had a little bit of an eye-opening experience here. Maybe you learned some new things, Mark. Did you learn something new about hearing some of the stories?
Of course I did. I learned about all these tools that are out there that radio stations now have in their toolkit to maximize the power that they have to build small businesses and brand small businesses.
Yeah, it's all about making money too. You got to pay the bills. You don't do it just because you love it, right, Tom?
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. So once again, I want to thank you for being a returning champion on the program, and we always have an open invitation. One time I'd like to get you and Ray Quinn here at the same time, because that would be very interesting. Tom and Ray worked together as what was the name of the company when you guys were buying up radio stations in the 90s?
Opus Media Group. And for those of you who don't know, Ray is my former brother-in-law, but forever brother.
There you go. So a brother from another mother. So yes. Tom, thanks for being here with us. We appreciate that. We appreciate all the questions. Alex, why don't you wrap things up here for us?
Thanks, Mitch. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for everyone who was in the chat. Sorry about the issues at the beginning of the show. Just wanted to thank the people that are making this show happen, which is the people at Boink Software that make the application Memo Live, which is what we're using to put this production together. And thank you to Oliver Breidenbach, who's been integral in helping us get that going. Of course, if you like this show, there are numerous ways you can contribute to this show. Mitch mentioned one of those things earlier. You can like and subscribe to the show on YouTube, share it with a friend. We would sincerely appreciate that. Also, this show, if you prefer on your morning commute to listen to it on your headphones, you can listen to this as an audio podcast. We're on all platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. You can ask your Amazon Alexa device to play this podcast as well. We're pretty much available wherever you find your podcasts. You can also donate to the show by going to patreon.com/thelastangry.dj. That's patreon.com/thelastangry.dj, and become a coffee supporter. That's what we call it, at $2 a month. We would sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, I prefer the single malt, 3 fingers instead of the coffee, whatever. And once again, don't forget, we're sponsored by our friends at Arby's. We have the meats, and Arby's has a great app if you want to use it to find out what specials they have. I'm telling you, it's very useful. If you like Arby's, you want to get a beef and cheddar, chances are you can get a BOGO on that and get 2 at once, which is really good. Thanks to Arby's. And Mark, you have any things you'd like to say to wrap things up here today?
Hey, it was great to get to have a conversation with a fellow radio station owner and learn a lot about the history of radio.
There we go. Appreciate that. Tom, so good to have you back on here, and I hope that we can call you a friend of show from now on. And
absolutely, Mitch.
I'm going to try to get you and Ray and Greaseman on the program to get him out of his retirement. But I got to get past his handler. I might have to use you guys to get me past, because the handler keeps brushing me off. And I don't have Doug's direct email, so maybe it'll work out. We can get him here. And I'd like him in character, because that would make for a very interesting show. So we want to thank you for being on. Say hello to your lovely wife, Aurora, and your family, and everybody enjoy Memorial Day weekend. And Alex is going to take next week off, so we're contemplating how we can make that actually happen without integral part of Alex being on the show. But maybe not. Alex, where you go? Tell everybody where you're headed for your day off.
Yeah, so I'm headed up to wine country, Naramata, British Columbia, which is a fantastic place to be. I'm feeling a little bit burnt out, but man, I love wine. I wouldn't call myself a wine connoisseur. I'm not super knowledgeable, but I know what tastes good. So I'm really looking forward to checking out some of the different wineries up there. It's been a long time since I've been up in that area. In fact, I actually just discovered you should really take a look at the website. I just discovered there's a new place that opened up in 2020. It's called the Wine Village. And if you look at an aerial photo, it is literally a circle with a bunch of different lodges, and all the local wineries they rent those buildings, and they have a really nice place to sit right in the center of it, and you can go around to each little lodge and try all the different wines. They have a stage set up as well, and they have live music and everything there. So I think it'll be a fun experience.
Sounds
Yeah,
great.
maybe get take some recommendations from George Carlin and get a radio station on the air. Wonderful Wino, W-I-N-O, Wino. You can come back and do that. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate you being here. Make sure you can ask questions, make comments, and make sure you smash that subscribe button so that we get more great guests on here like Tom Birch. Thank you all. Be very safe out there.